World building is tricky. You've got all this stuff about the politics and trade and cultures of your world you want to share with people, but it's hard to get people to care, and characters don't usually have a good reason to sit around thinking about it without it feeling really forced. And all of this is why I realized food is kinda a world-building superpower. Seriously, think about it. Characters need to eat all the time. They have opinions on food, desires and memories and backstory, and scenes can be easily set at a meal. It's just human behavior. And through that, you can slip in all that dirty exposition about the world you love without it feeling like an info dump. It's a really subtle but really powerful way to deepen your world.
Oh, and by the way, did you know if you scan this delicious, tasty QR code, my next 2 videos are already waiting for you over on Nebula, which only deepens our world building and writing discussions from today. Link below as well.
I mean, you can learn so much about a world's Part 1 culture just by looking at how and what and when and where and why people eat. Stuff which is basically background to a scene. In Avatar: The Last Airbender, air nomad cuisine tends to be simpler and closer to the raw ingredients. Think apple salad, moon peaches, onion banana juice, minimally processed foods and ingredients which can be easily gathered or scavenged from nature by a nomadic people who can fly anywhere. Fire Nation cuisine, on the other hand, is more processed, relies on more complex cooking techniques and temperature control. It's spicy, often using firebending in the process, with more meat supported by its industrialized economy. Or you can explore deeper cultural values, like food often has a lot to say about gender roles. In Brandon Sanderson's Stormlight Archives, Alethi men eat these spicy, intense dishes while women get milder, sweeter curries, and it's all to kind of demonstrate these Alethi ideas of what gender is. Men are expected to be these hardy, tough warrior leaders, while women are taught to be softer, modest, and literally sweeter. And I hear you, that's weird, it doesn't make any sense, but we actually do this in our world. Like, look closely at this. What is it? Whiskey, you say, but it's also a symbol of masculinity, while things like salads and bakings are apparently associated with femininity. That is badly watered down orange juice. Or think about the role meat plays in your world. What does it say about their relationship with the natural environment? Think about how prominent certain kinds of meat in a food culture can say something about the society's relationship with the natural world. The way people approach food in your world can reflect how they're supposed to present themselves in society, interact with others, or even fulfill their roles in their culture, and that itself can be a source of internal and external conflict when characters do or don't fit those roles. Food can often be symbolic in how it's eaten, why, how it's made, as other characters react to and think about them. Like in A Song of Ice and Fire, offering bread and salt, 2 foods essential for survival in a world like this, is a symbolic promise of safety, rooted in real history, by the way. It's a gesture that has long been used in different cultures to show trust and protection between a guest and a host. And in fact, let's think about the Red Wedding, a meal, but not just as like the most shocking scene in the story, but as an incredibly important world-building bit for Westeros. In the books, we see how Walder Frey is shunned for breaking guest rights, how bread and salt don't mean as much as they used to, all because of the Red Wedding. We understand the values here through food. I mean, food shows up in language symbolically all the time. Like there's this phrase in Chinese, the rice is already cooked, which means, you know, what's done is done, can't be undone. Just how your characters talk is going to say a lot about how your cultures think, the common touchstones they use. It's because of this that symbolic food often crosses over with religion. Like, did you know that lembas bread from Middle-earth—
How many did you eat? 4.
Isn't just something I really wish I could have, but actually a really important cultural, religious food for the elves. It was given to them by this sort of goddess, Yavanna, and so only the Yavanaldi, the sacred order of the maidens of Yavanna, are allowed to make it. The act of baking and giving lembas becomes this sacred ritual. Food is, of course, an essential part of feasts and festivals to celebrate the changing of the seasons, or rites of passage, or important historical events in a culture. Think Thanksgiving turkey every year. Food says a lot about how cultures and your characters understand themselves and their history. But food isn't just about what people eat, it's about what they don't eat. Just by being eaten around something important, the food itself can become something important. Which animals or plants are sacred, should never be touched, or should be cultivated in particular ways, and how does your character feel when they see it being eaten or dealt with differently? Eating one thing might be taboo in culture and sacred and essential in another. The Elder Scrolls actually has a fascinating taboo in their wood elves, the Bosmer, who seem to be these kind of peaceful, serene elves that we're used to in fantasy, only they're bound by something called the Green Pact, a sacred oath that forbids them from harming plant life. So they eat meat, and when I say that, I mean they're carnivores. They are almost cannibals, so much so that they fast before a battle because they have to consume the dead afterwards, including their own kind. Cannibalism is taboo for us, but required religiously for them. And all of this, gender roles, cultural philosophies, taboos, the best practices for handling certain kinds of foods, often end up being codified into like myths and religious stories to preserve and crystallize those ideas. Like the Iroquois and Cherokee tell the story of the three sisters, three girls who were turned into corn, beans, and squash, the staple crops of their people, and to ensure their happiness, supposedly they always need to be planted together. A tradition that isn't just symbolic, right? But it's actually a really effective farming method. They grow better in this way. So consider, how can religious and cultural stories in your world give symbolic meanings to foods and practices, connecting the act of eating or cultivating to deeper values? And how does religion and myth preserve food practices? There is this temptation, I think, to think about food world building as like always representative of some wider cultural value or circumstance, when like food is self-expression, it is creativity, it is identity, and it's how people bond together. Human expression is culture. What we like to eat and drink and how we like it and who we like it with and where we like it, how we share that with our community. Like, think of coffee. We have so much fun with it. Every different coffee shop will have their own fun spin on a latte, and everyone has their own way that they like their coffee that they really identify with, almost. Like, my wife Laura loves cinnamon spice coffee at Christmas because it feels festive and she likes festive things. Every culture has its own take on coffee, and in that, food isn't always reflective of some deeper cultural values around strength or honor or gender or the struggles against a harsh winter. A lot of really famous foods are products of people just expressing themselves, what they like, people just being people in a culture collectively building up an identity. You put enough people, all of whom are their own unique, individual, creative people just being people and building up this identity that they can all share. It becomes special because it's part of us. Infinitely variable because people are infinitely variable. Regardless of their values or geography, any collection of thousands or even millions of people expressing themselves through food over time is going to end up with an incredibly unique mountain of self-expression. It's about the recipes our grandparents passed down, the meals we grew up with, the things we learned to cook as kids and now find comforting. But with all of that said, part 2, geography. Let's be honest, the environment, the physical world around us, what actually grows there is maybe the biggest factor in what we actually eat. Even today, take a look at this map of a fictional world, and let's focus on this southern continent here. We'll call it the Mashkarian Empire. The grasslands might be perfect for grain production, wheat, crops, so they probably eat a lot of that. But up here in the Momo Republic, maybe their soil isn't good or flat enough to be really good for crops, so they instead rely on livestock and dairy products. People around here, though, they maybe fish from the lakes and rivers a lot more. And so we can easily imagine how a world like this might influence culture on a very base level over time. Let's say the people of the Mashkarian Empire worship someone called the Wheat Weaver, a goddess who every summer weaves a golden cloth that mimics the patterns of a wheat field, and before meals around a fire, your characters might plant a simple grain as a sacrifice. The wetter and hotter areas of your world might be suitable for growing something more like rice, so maybe when that religion gets transferred over to them, they instead plant a single grain of rice as a sacrifice. A Song of Ice and Fire even has a popular fan theory which is rooted in food geography of all things, and it has all to do with a lemon tree. In the books, Daenerys repeatedly references a beloved lemon tree outside her window in Braavos as some distant memory, a food she loved as a kid and has since become a symbol of her innocence, of her childhood. But we're also told multiple times in the books that lemon trees do not grow in Braavos. It's way too barren and cold, so people think maybe, just maybe, these memories aren't quite what they seem. They aren't real, or they come from somewhere else, like Dawn, where lemons do grow. This is a pretty concrete example of how a character's relationship with food can be used to explore the physical world, to hint at a deeper story, to foreshadow plot developments, and also how foods and ingredients can become characteristically important to how we see ourselves, our past, our identity, our self-expression, a lens through which we can understand these characters more deeply, like we just talked about. And you know what? I'm sure we'll get our full answers when The Winds of Winter comes out soon. You know, I've noticed something interesting. There's been this rise in stories which really want to explore their world's ecology and natural world, and they often do that through food. In Delicious in Dungeon, we see that people eat these carnivorous plants, which would literally eat them if they could. There's all different species of these things called shadowtails, which reproduce by burying seeds under your skin, or there's the mere oak, which captures smaller animals and uses those to bait larger prey. These are predatory plants, and by seeing how characters have to hunt and prepare and eat these creatures, we can kind of get an idea for the ecology of these worlds. Food is necessarily going to be reflective of their natural environment, but it's also often reflective of unique struggles that they've had in that environment.
300 to fix our broken urine purifier?
Yeah, the urine purifier is broken.
In The Expanse by James S. A. Corey, mushrooms become an essential part of spacefaring humanity's diet in the asteroid belt, and for good reason. They're kind of the perfect space crop. They don't need as much light or soil, and they're really good at recycling waste into something useful and edible. And I cannot hammer this home hard enough. This is the strength of sci-fi and fantasy world building. Our worlds get to be anything we want them to be, anything you can imagine. Enough with the worlds which basically look just like ours. We look out the window with a new coat of paint. You can have anything you want inside them. You get to write the rules. We don't have to operate on a 1990s Stargate filming right outside of Vancouver budget anymore. Scavenger's Reign is easily one of the most creative and amazing TV shows out there right now. Please go watch it. And it's basically all about this fantastically unique alien world ecology, and you get to understand it, how it all works, through how people interact with it, how they eat it from time to time. One character survives by being fed by this strange creature which develops kind of symbiotic, possibly parasitic relationships with other creatures around it. It feeds them this black goo and kind of brainwashes them by giving them dreams and turning them into thralls, getting other creatures to fetch food for it in turn. So much of the story is kind of about the characters trying to find their place in the food chain here. Unique environmental struggles and cultural inventions can often end up in the creation of new foods, which become symbols of national identity and pride. Maple syrup, pavlova, and hummus, which I assume only one country has claim to. But one really interesting detail a lot of people don't tend to think about is that these culturally iconic foods often don't start out as symbols of pride. They begin as survival foods, often for the very poor. Maple syrup is just that. That's why a lot of iconic foods are fermented or calorie dense, made to help people endure famine and winter. Think pemmican. What are characters eating in a harsh winter as opposed to a fruitful summer? And how do your characters feel about their cultural dishes? A sense of pride, a need for it to be made a certain way, frustration when someone doesn't. Part 3, History. You can show all sorts of stuff about trade routes, migration, and conquest just by looking at what and how characters eat. Like, colonialism has left an indelible mark on almost every cuisine in the world. Ingredients and cooking methods were forced together in ways that still shape how we eat today. Filipino cuisine has indigenous flavors, Spanish influence after being colonized, and even some American. Like, Spam is a hugely popular breakfast food, and that's a legacy of American occupation in World War II, when canned goods were a reliable food source. But at the same time, cultural exchange like this can often lead to conflict. Foods from other cultures will often be painted as barbaric, disgusting, or unhealthy if they don't fit the other culture's norms, or as just a way to assert their superiority. Different ways of eating, like using your hand or chopsticks, have been historically stigmatized as uncivilized. Stigmatized or lost foods or cooking techniques can tell stories of oppression, of war, even genocide. Historically in Canada, the hunting of seal, elk, and caribou was banned to force indigenous peoples to rely on a settler diet, and in that, assimilate into this other culture by painting their original way of life as uncivilized. And your characters are going to live in a world where those dynamics exist. They're either going to experience that prejudice, perpetuate it, or observe it. One character might be desperately trying to keep their culture's culinary traditions alive, holding onto old recipes, or maybe they never learned how to make their culture's foods, and they feel that loss of identity. Or they might feel revulsion to another culture they consider barbaric compared to theirs. Section 4, Economy. You can use food to highlight class differences, wealth disparities, divides in your society that come with what people eat and how. In Cyberpunk 2077, fresh food is virtually reserved only for the ultra-wealthy. Most people are left to eat this low-quality, mass-produced kind of kibble designed to meet basic nutritional needs. It's made out of kelp, plankton, soy proteins, and it's cheap, unpalatable, and a really effective way of expressing that the lower classes are no more value than dogs. Food and water has become intensely commodified. The food of the lower classes is increasingly processed to make it cheaper. In your world though, do the rich even notice how different their food is from others? What do your poor eat compared to the middle or rich? What is a rare treat for one but standard breakfast for another? Like these delectable stroopwafels, which I'd never had before but I absolutely love, not sponsored but I wish I was. We'll just put you over there. Like typically the richer you are, the more meat you eat. Or do different classes eat at different times because they work at different times? And keep in mind that technology, or magic potentially, can massively transform which foods are available to people and how cheap they are. Refrigeration and canning suddenly meant we could transport foods over long distances without deterioration. Tropical fruits, which used to be luxuries, were suddenly cheap. Subsequent overconsumption of lobster led it to become a delicacy. If you've got wizards and spells which can easily freeze food, that's going to change what people can eat, how they preserve things, and what is available to who. The wealthy might eat more hot food or be able to afford that magical berry from your world. Similarly, how people eat tells us a lot, like the purpose of food. In the Hunger Games, we see how the people of the capital gorge themselves at banquets, then drink a poison so that they can vomit it all up and eat even more. It's this wild, grotesque display of excess, and it really highlights the food disparity in this world. The capital and Panem, it is an extractive system. The people in the capital don't have to worry about food as a source of nutrition or survival. They only care about food as kind of an experience, the fun of it. It's a massive contrast to the districts where food is scarce and survival is a constant concern, and shows how people in different classes here think about themselves and others. How the people of the capital approach food speaks to their blissful apathy towards how their system is sustained. It's an ignorance and apathy which we see becomes a huge part of Katniss's radicalization. And I hear you, that's ridiculous. We would never let something like that happen, but let me tell you about the most expensive restaurant in the world. Sublimotion tries to engage all your senses in a gastronomic performance with floating plates, VR headsets, and a 22-course dinner which doesn't even resemble food. I can understand enjoying fine dining, but at some point I think it becomes a con. But as funny as it is, there is actually something more interesting at play here. The wealthy look for ways to distinguish themselves from everyone else, and food is one way they do that. They turn it into performance art, and because if only the wealthy can afford to eat a certain dish, it reinforces that hierarchy and marks them apart as better, above. You can signal your status to others in society by what you can eat and experience and provide when people come to your house, which is why when poor people can suddenly afford certain types of experiences and food, they're suddenly less interested in it. And like one way that they make this distinction is with manners.
What a superbly featured room, and what excellent boiled potatoes. Many years since I've had such an exemplary vegetable.
Dining etiquette. Eating can become this elaborate ritual, with each utensil and gesture and course planned to reflect a kind of tradition, a practice. By making it a skill you essentially have to learn, you make it harder for outsiders, especially from other classes or cultures, to join. And you can use this as tension in your scenes. We've all seen those scenes where the poor character can't figure out which fork to use for the life of them. I do want to note that it's not that middle or lower classes have no manners, it's just that they typically have different manners, a different eating culture. Like street food is a massively important part in much of the world. It's just not a culture that's built to keep people out. Beyond that, you can use food to say a hell of a lot about my favorite thing, trade routes. In A Song of Ice and Fire, delicacies like Dornish wines or citrus fruits like oranges and lemons are repeatedly singled out as these expensive luxuries which only the wealthiest and powerful can afford, but it also shows us trade connections to Dorne, all the way at the other end of the world. If we go back to our map, imagine if a character managed to purchase a tropical fruit called a pollywop all the way up in the snowy poles. Just through this simple exchange, we have to imagine there's some kind of connecting trade route stretching all the way around to something like the sunny shores of the Mishkarian Empire. But come here, all right, come here. Come. There's a big part of this discussion we're missing, right? Magical food. It is everywhere in fantasy and sci-fi, and yet it almost never seems to fundamentally change these worlds when it would. It would have to. Like, think about it, all right? If you could create food which gives people specific boons, +2 to stamina, +10 to strength, eat this creme fraiche and you can see the future, that wouldn't just be a cool plot point. It would change the world. Think about it. Food would no longer just be about like survival, necessity, enjoyment. It would be about power. If there's a berry that lets warriors workers fight for hours without tiring. Whole nations would set up these guarded plantations just to maintain their supply. It would be a security necessity, or like a rare root that slows down aging would instantly become this immensely expensive, high-in-demand thing which maybe creates a divide between the rich eternally young and the aging lower classes. Or what about a porridge, which is incredibly bland, but if you eat it, you can fly for a day? I mean, who wouldn't? What people eat, like these wonderful Delmain stroopwafels, not sponsored but I wish I was, would become just as much, if not more, about the magical boons you could get than it is about taste or enjoyment or nutrition. Work smarter, not harder, eat smarter, not healthier. The economic incentives in a world like this would just be entirely different, and if humanity is anything, we are min-maxers. I'm sick of seeing worlds which clearly have magical foods, but like they aren't integral to every kind of industry and politics which would necessarily want to take advantage of them. No need to learn when you can just magically make yourself smarter whenever you eat a Twinkie. People would be eating those terrible Jell-O salads if it meant that they could conjure the ghost of childhood memories. Powerful, desirable, and tied to both pleasure and conflict. Like whole industries would form around growing, trading, and controlling these magical foods. Governments would be trying to regulate or monopolize these foods to ensure there's no unchecked use of their power, and that's to say nothing of the class divides it would create if some were available to one class and not another, or the magical detrimental effects which only one class has to suffer through. And like the real world version of all of this is, let's be honest, drugs and alcohol trigger you to demonetization. Buy my books. We fight wars over them, use them to relax and celebrate, they help us fall in love, but they also bring huge social issues and burdens. Got the munchies because drugs and alcohol are inescapably caught up in how we eat and why. And I hear you, how can you talk about magical food without mentioning Dune? Well, in Dune, melange is the most valuable substance in the universe, full stop. It extends lifespans, it grants near magical powers like the ability to see the future, and it's also kind of, well, this is gonna sound a bit on the nose, but it's a spice. We're told it tastes like cinnamon, literally. It's used in everything, food, drink, even inhalable gas, and whoever controls it basically controls the galaxy. The Spacing Guild, which controls space travel, is completely dependent on the spice supply. It's consumed in religious ceremonies, its role in extraction reflects the colonial past of Dune, and how it's used says so much about the cultures of those in the story. For the Fremen, it's this religious food which is part of everyday life, and just by characters consuming, buying, thinking about the spice, we get to understand so much about this world. Both drugs and alcohol have helped people survive throughout history by dulling hunger, plus alcohol was a key source of calories and nutrients back in the day when water wasn't clean. And let's not forget, a lot of drugs have, and some still are, being used as medicine, especially if they're magical, antiseptics, pain relievers, even anesthetics. Think about how substances like drugs or alcohol might play a pivotal role in your world, as nutrition, as survival, as religious items, as symbols. But of course, if substances are rare or restricted, then they can become more valuable, black markets. Just look at American Prohibition in the 1920s. Banning alcohol just made it more valuable, gave power to organized crime, and infamous figures like Al Capone exploded onto the scene. Corruption spread through law enforcement, politicians, and judges, and created this complex web of power, wealth, and crime that reshaped American society and the economy. How your drugs are ingested, normalized, or the tension around them can show a lot about how a culture thinks and values. A black market, though, is gonna be a fundamental part of any economy, whether we like it or not. Black markets are outlets for desires which the legal framework aren't meeting. Part 5. Power. Food is essential, and that means it's always been a tool of control. For most of history, and pretty much today, the ruling class has controlled food production, so who owns the fields, the factories can tell us a lot about who is in power in your world. But food has also long been a form of soft power, a way to spread your culture and influence without explicit force, and a great world-building tidbit. Like the opening scenes of Blade Runner, the quintessential cyberpunk world is designed to show us how dominant Asian culture is through decade eating their food, especially Japanese. Asian food has become the norm in LA as the Japanese economy became globally dominant in this timeline, reflecting fears of this takeover that were very real at the time. You could show the entire geopolitical balance of your world just through cuisine, through the advertising and cooking methods and what food is available and what's the go-to takeout. What cooking utensils do people use? Sometimes governments will even launch soft power initiatives to increase their influence. And I've got a harsh truth for you. As much as we have lofty ideas about how revolutions start, a lot of the time it's a lot more to do with food than you might think. People are starving and it's time to throw hands. You know that phrase, let them eat cake, which Marie Antoinette probably never said?
I'm going to kill you, and all the cake is gone.
But it stuck around because it does get to the heart of something true, that the elite class was very disconnected from the struggles of the everyday poor, that they were starving. The revolution was preempted by France's Flour War in 1775, where grain shortages were causing bread prices to dramatically rise, and there were riots all across France, all of which foreshadowed the French Revolution itself. Like, if you want a realistic revolution, don't show people complaining about the philosophical problems with monarchy. Show them frustrated with the price of bread. And connected to this idea is the old line that an army marches on its stomach. In the Stormlight Archives, Brandon Sanderson has this really unique magic system which allows for food to be created out of nothing, basically, allowing them to sustain armies for much longer over weird distances in strange places. Logistics matter less. They don't need to be connected to where the food was originally coming from. In A Song of Ice and Fire, though, we learn about how the Tyrells taunt Stannis Baratheon during the Siege of Storm's End by feasting outside the walls, all trying to pressure him to surrender. Power doesn't just flow from the barrel of a gun here, but from the breadbasket. And we learn how Stannis had to resort to eating leather and rats, desperation expressed through food. So take a look at the wars and rebellions and revolutions in your world and look at them through the lens of food. How has food started these things and how has it ended them? But let's take all of these ideas, culture and history and power, and let's imagine a world around them. Imagine the people of the Mashkarian Empire set their eyes on the Momo Republic. They need that land for their national security, and so the Empire starts cutting down the Republic's forest to grow their sacred wheat. They destroy the Momo Republic's livestock and dairy production in the process. Maybe they relocate their people to the harsh northern poles where the livestock have no more food to eat and they're no longer a viable food source. So as the Empire gains control, we can imagine the Momo Republic losing access to their native practices and foods, their traditional ways of life and eating snuffed out. The Empire's food becomes the only source of survival they have, a new norm, but we also can see how small pockets of the Republic might try to pass down old recipes of dairy and cheese as a kind of show of resistance. Or look at this little strip of land connecting the continents. A free city-state might directly control shipping routes to the far edges of both continents by building a canal. This could mean a huge influx of wealth as they tax the goods traveling through, but it would also make them a target. And the Mashkarian Empire might seize their chance to take it and kind of control foods flowing into the Momo Republic. Now imagine a rare fungus, we can call it frost moss, and it's only found at this northern tip of the Momo Republic. It makes you feel warm and peaceful, perfect for surviving brutal winters, but it's also really addictive and debilitating. And so wealthy buyers, they take over the polar land and cartels move it through the black market, and the Mashkarians smuggle this frost moss into Momo communities to weaken them. Addiction spirals out of control as frost moss ends up in fueling this vicious cycle where the rich get richer and everyone else pays the price.
But I want to ask you another question. Do you have gods in your world? Are they powerful? Do they interfere? Do they want to? Should they? Is it disastrous when they do? The God Dilemma is all about these entities of vast and unimaginable power who show up all the time in fantasy, and the choices they make often have a huge impact on this world and story you're creating. You need to have an answer as to why these gods would or wouldn't interfere with your world below and what that does to them personally. In fact, I love this topic so much. I think it's such a fantastic and interesting avenue for world building that I made a whole video about it on the God Dilemma. And you can watch it, by the way, right now at the QR code on screen and link below. I also talk through kind of the writing of this kind of story, the tropes we love, because I know if you're here and you love world building, you also probably love writing like I do, which is why there's a whole other video right now on how to write curses and why fantasy is obsessed with them, all at my very non-cursed link and QR code, because these videos, by the way, are only possible because of Nebula with their help, and by their, I mean my, because I am a part of it. Nebula means that I don't have to worry about demonetization on my videos, like whether the Geneva Convention applies to orcs, and yes, that is a video I'm making, or the abusive copyright strike I just got for a video, which is absolutely fair use and it is infuriating and I will fight it. We wanted to bring together some of the best storytellers to give them the freedom to create on their own terms, where you can watch it, by the way, without any interruptions, no ads. I hate ads. I hate that I have a streaming service and I can still see them. It is infuriating. I could scream, and it's pretty cheap. Like, it astounds me how cheap we keep it. And if you use my very non-cursed QR code, you can also get 40% off, just a few bucks a month. That's $36 a year, the price of a single coffee a month. But do not take my word for it. You'll know what you want to watch better than me. So go find what you want to watch
at my link down below. If you love storytelling, world building, fictional forms, Nebula is where you want to be. Join us today. But let's summarize all of this. 1. Food allows you to naturally explore culture, politics, trade, and power dynamics in an engaging way. 2. What people eat, how they eat it, who they share it with can reflect a society's values, identity, and social structures, as well as individual self-expression. 3. A society's food can reflect its environment, with regional ingredients and cooking methods adapting to available resources. 4. You can trace the history of a culture through the ingredients they import and export, showing influences from conquests and trade routes. 5. Magical food will completely change an economy to revolve around the power that food can offer. 6. Throughout history, food has been used to subjugate populations, whether in warfare or as a luxury to reinforce class divides. 7. Humans have always been drawn to drugs and alcohol, but they also contribute to war and social ills in society. So next time you sit down with a story, take a moment to think about what might be on your character's plate, and maybe let that tell the story. Stay nerdy, and I'll see you in the future.